Come join me for a moment in the Garden of Eden. Look around. We're in a beautiful green space with beautiful fruit trees. This is the Garden of Eden that we celebrate today. Hayom Harat Olam. Today the world was called into being. That, the rabbis say, is day 6 of creation, when Adam awoke and looked around, and there was all this magnificent nature. Animals that seemingly lived in harmony, fruit trees of every kind. Amidst paradise, there was only one rule. Just one tree at the center of the garden not to eat from. Imagine now having just left the garden. Let me imagine for you or with you by being Adam for but a moment. Kol etz hanechmad umareh v'tov l'ma'achal. Every tree is beautiful to look at, and every fruit is delicious to eat. So were God's words in introducing me to the Garden of Eden. I can't believe we blew it. Here we are standing outside the gates. God has kicked us out. Now, I'm not blaming God. Not now, at least. I know that God gave us a rule not to eat from the tree in the center of the garden. I can't believe we blew it. We had it made. We had these delicious fruits. Every day I'd get up at breakfast, a different fruit. Papaya, mango, breadfruit. But that tree at the center of the garden, it sure kept drawing my attention. Why didn't God want me to eat from it? What was God afraid of? If it was forbidden, it must surely be better tasting than anything else I had ever had. It must have truly been divine. And here I am, having been kicked out. I have little leather garments that God, Lord and Taylor, made for me and made for Eve, and has said to us, now outside of paradise, your tallis won't stay on. And not only that, but Eve will give birth in pain. And me, Adam, it's with the sweat of my brow that I will have to draw forth fruits and vegetables now from the ground. I can't believe I blew it. We live in a culture in which aspiring for comfort, aspiring to have the material possessions of the Garden of Eden, materiality in abundance, is a constant refrain. If we only had it all, or at least a little more, we would be happy. You know, it wasn't always so easy as it is today. In Masechet Eruvin 13b, the Talmud, there's actually a debate between Hillel and Shammai, the two great sages, first century Israel. And the debate is it better to have been born or not? And the debate went on and on, I imagine. It doesn't say how long it took place. But they debated, and then they reached a consensus. And the consensus in the Talmud is, it would have been better not to have been born at all, but since we're here, we'll make the best of it. In reading a book by Patrick McMahon on the history of happiness, he recounts that in early Greece, the chances of a child living to the age of 5 were no better than living beyond 5. That in the course of any year, entire towns were wiped out by pestilence or marauders. And in almost every village, there were terribly deformed people. Think Ben-Hur. It was not easy to survive. It was almost not a category in antiquity to consider happiness as a goal of life. But you don't have to just look back to see how much times have changed. Consider the year 1900. Imagine that you are living in the year 1900, and I am a speaker who will describe to you the beginning of the 21st century. For you, in the year 1900, the average life expectancy is 46 years. In 100 years from now, your life expectancy will approach 100. 1900, the major causes of death in America. Number 1, TB, influenza, and infection. 100 years from now, every major town will have a TB sanatorium, but there'll be nobody there. We will have wiped out TB effectively in the United States. In the year 1900, only 1 out of 7 families had a bathtub in their home. In 100 years, you're going to have baths and showers and jacuzzis, hot tubs, swimming pools, and that's middle-class America. Oh, Orange County middle-class America. The year 1900, you probably had a horse. 100 years from now, you're going to have this vehicle, a car. You're going to sit in, it'll feel like your living room, and you'll have 100+ horses underneath you, going from 0 to 60 in seconds. And not just you, but everybody in the family will seem to have one after the age of 16. Planes, you'll be able to travel over oceans, overseas, and hardly skip a meal. In the year 1900, if you wanted to send a letter overseas, it could take weeks going by boat. But in the year 2006, you can communicate with a phone in your pocket. You can go on a little box, a computer, and with a video camera and Skype for free, talk instantaneously anywhere in the world. Now, if you were alive in the year 1900, hearing these descriptions of the future, you might think to yourself, wow, if I lived in the year 2000, it wouldn't be like today. If I lived in the year 2000 with all those comforts, I would really be happy. And yet, that does not seem to be the case. There are millions in our nation who suffer from depression. Suicide takes twice as many lives in America each year as homicide. And beyond those tragedies, we all know that up close, our lives are often filled with angst, tension, failed expectations. There's a new psychology of happiness. It's relatively new. It's called positive psychology. It's only been around about 25 years, started by a psychiatrist named Martin Seligman, just won a major award last week for his work. It's the attempt to take people, instead of traditional psychology, from -5 to 0, to try and take people from 0 to +5. And they've been doing lots of studies about what is it that makes people happy. Here are some of the things that they have found. They interviewed, 1978, this is toward the beginning at the University of Michigan. They did a study in which they interviewed 22 people who had won the lottery, $1 million plus. 1978, it was even more money than now. And they tracked them with a control group to see how winning the lottery impacted on their level of well-being. Those who won the lottery, compared to those who did not, 1 year later, were basically the same. It had not changed the level of happiness. Nations have been surveyed with polls of different kinds to indicate a sense of happiness. They found that those nations where the average income was below $10,000 a year, there was significant unhappiness compared to those that had more than $10,000 a year. However, beyond $10,000 a year as the national average, there was no difference between nations in terms of dollars as to how happy people were as a group. More than dollars, more than comfort, levels of happiness are controlled by cultural expectations and by a sense of community. In our tradition, the striving for material success is embraced. At the end of Masechet Kedushin in the Jerusalem Talmud, the rabbis say that when you go to the world to come, God will say to you, "Why is it that you did not partake of all that was permitted to you?" The image is that this is a banquet that God provides, that material possessions are a blessing, that God as the parent gives to us to enjoy. And so it says in Masechet Eruvin in the Bavli, "Eat and drink, enjoy while you can before you leave this world." At the same time, there is the recognition that there are limits as well in terms of enjoyment. A man came to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist said to him, "What is the reason that you've made the appointment?" The man said, "I don't know. My family told me I had to come." "Well, really," the psychiatrist said, "what was it that prompted them to say that you should come and talk to me?" The man looked and said, "I don't know. I love pancakes. They told me I had to come and talk to you because I love pancakes." The psychiatrist says, "I like pancakes too." "Really?" the man said, his eyes brightening. "Then come to my house. I got boxes of pancakes in every room." And the question is, how many pancakes do you need to be happy? How much stuff do you need to feel stuffed? How much do you need before you feel happy? There's a story told, it's a midrash, that the rabbis tried to capture the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara is this understood inclination to compete with others, this desire to always want more, this desire to not just be comfortable, but very, 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 very comfortable. And so the midrash in Breshit Rabbah is that one day the rabbis did it. They took the Yetzer Hara and they put it in a box. And then they say, the next day, no chickens were born, no houses were built, and there was no commerce that transpired. When they saw that the world came to a standstill, they let the Yetzer Hara loose again. The image of the rabbis is the recognition that we are indeed hardwired to compete. We're hardwired to want more. It's understandable from an evolutionary point of view. For the species to grow, there is a natural competition. For people to develop, there is a natural desire to want more. Our disposition is hardwired. At the University of Minnesota, for years, they've been doing twin studies, looking at both identical twins as well as fraternal twins to determine how much is genetics. And what they've found in regard to cheerfulness, an attitude of basically being happy, is that it's as close as 80% genetically mandated. 80%. When they take twins, some of whom were separated at birth and they bring them together, their personalities are probably the part of them that is as hardwired as their facial expressions. It's quite humbling. And yet, at the same time, that means there's still 20% left. As other psychologists have noted, 20% is a lot. 20%, if you're in a business, is the difference between succeeding or failing. 20% is the possibility of a jockey. The possibility beyond that which is genetically programmed to hold the reins and to steer one's inclinations. For what makes us distinctly human is self-reflection, the ability to see to the future, the ability to exert will. 20% is the ability to decide, which is why we're here. These are 10 days of tshuva, asarat yemei tshuva, 10 days in which we're told that we can choose how to live. Part of our challenge is learning to be happy. There is always somebody else with more. Already Maimonides in the 12th century said, when all you have as a wooden spoon, they had lower standards then, you'll note that there's somebody else with a silver spoon. And when you acquire the silver spoon, you'll be aware there's somebody with a gold spoon. And when you acquire the gold spoon, you'll become aware that there's somebody with a spoon made from precious stones. There is always more. Our tradition is a tradition of paradox. It acknowledges that it is good to embrace blessing. It is a tradition that acknowledges that it's okay to compete, because ultimately our challenge is to be the best that we can be, to live out the potential with which we were endowed. And that means striving. That means living with some anxiety of expectations not yet met. And yet at the same time, there's a second foot. And that is the words of Ben Zoma from Pirkei Avot. Mi ashir hu shesamech bechelko. Who is rich? The one who is content with his or her portion. Ashir, rich, is written with an ayin. It is the same sound as ashir, written with an aleph. There's this play in Hebrew where ayin is often that which is external. For instance, skin is or, with an ayin. Light, internal, is or with an aleph. Ayin is I with an ayin. Ayin is an I in Hebrew. With an aleph, it's nothingness. It's the sense that there is more to life than can be seen. And so the words of Ben Zoma, Mi ashir hu shesamech bechelko, can be understood with an aleph as well. Who is content? Who is happy? The one who is content with what he or she has. The challenge in life is to be happy with what you already have. That's the other foot. We live in a culture in which we're constantly impressed to believe that we need more. One comment about how hard it is to think independently. A study from Berkeley, social psychologist, an elevator. When the elevator doors open, usually people are facing you, right? And you get in and you turn around, you face the door. Berkeley psychologists arranged it so that subjects, her, as they would say in the world of psychology, her confederates, would be facing with their tushies facing toward the door. When the door opened, people got in and invariably faced in the same direction as everybody else. So the graduate student thought, what if I get the people standing, not straight, back to the side? Door opens, everybody's standing to the side. Person gets in, more often than not, they look, they turn, they stand to the side. Social psychologist says, let me try it with them standing on one foot. Door opens, everyone's on one foot. People walk in, more often than not, by the time they hit the floor they're going to, are on one foot too. We're wired as well to be part of group. We're wired to pick up on cues as to what's important. In this Orange County, with Disneyland as our symbol, the happiest place on earth, we are reminded that we are influenced greatly by the world in which we live, whether we're aware of it or not. Rather than dancing with 2 feet, one foot being striving and the other being contentment, we're usually doing the bunny hop. We're usually feeling as if We need more. We need more. In order to prepare for this sermon, I read a great deal. I also did something that I like to do, which are my Studs Terkel interviews. I interviewed a whole array of people who've blessed me, some here in this room, saying to them, tell me about how you understand happiness. I did a series of interviews among those with people who play out my fantasy, namely, they are exceedingly wealthy, and they give away a lot of money. Normally, I couldn't ask them about it, but I'm working on a sermon. So I said in a series of interviews, what's it like to be extraordinarily wealthy? And I learned something. I learned, first of all, that when you're very rich, people laugh at your jokes. And that's a problem. That's what one person told me. He said, but it's a problem. It's a problem because self-esteem comes from being honored for yourself. When you're very rich and they're laughing at your joke, you're not sure if they're laughing because of the joke or to be ingratiating. It clouds up the sense of, are people close to you? Are they fond of you for yourself or what you represent? I talked with them about philanthropy, people who give away a lot of money to good causes. That's one of my fantasies. And what I learned is it's not so easy. When people know that you have a lot of money, they have a lot of good reasons to ask for money. And it's very hard to do it in a responsible way, to know who to give it to know how it's best used, to know what kind of accountability there should be, and if a gift should be renewed or not. One person shared with me that giving money away mostly feels exhausting. I said, well, don't you step back and appreciate it? He says, sometimes. Sometimes I step back and I know it's a privilege. It's a great privilege to be able to use resources to make a difference in the world. But frankly, day in and day out, it's an abstraction. Helping my kids with homework, that's real. Giving away money is a bit of an abstraction, and it's mostly just hard work. That conversation, that series of conversations, was particularly revealing to me. At this phase of my life as a rabbi, I have a lot of rabbi friends who have crashed, mostly through ethical improprieties. One of the risks of the trade. One of the risks of the trade that comes with being elevated up on a pedestal and beginning to believe that you are indeed more than just another person. Day in and day out, the work of a rabbi can be quite exhausting, being pulled in many directions and most people not seeing who else is pulling. The awareness that you are indeed, as a rabbi, a symbol of the Jewish people and even for some of God, that's heavy stuff. To care for a large group of people as a caregiver, and indeed to care, sincerely to care, is greatly fatiguing. I know many rabbis who are burnt out or burning out. That conversation was very helpful because I too often fail to take into account the privilege of what I do. I think it's true for most of us. We swim in water, and mostly we just feel fatigued from the swimming. It takes times like this, Rosh Hashana, to pause, to appreciate the water in which we swim, to step back from all that momentum pushing us to want more, to say, Dayenu, I have enough. What I have is good. It's a privilege to lead the life I live. Yes, I want more. Yes, I would like to grow. Yes, there are things I would like to do, but Dayenu too. This too is enough. It's a dance with 2 feet. The world in which we live, even with all our comforts, is not an easy world. Part of my privilege is to know many of the stories in this room, and to know that we are just people, no different than those in 1900 or in the first century Israel, We too struggle with relationships. We too deal with tragedies. We too are frustrated by others who are not so kind. And yet we have, at the same time, so much to be grateful for. There's another story that I received from my friend Rabbi Eddie Feinstein about the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve lived most of their lives outside the garden, but they often reminisced, nostalgically longing for paradise lost. They were already quite old and decided to go for a long stroll in the direction that they recalled the Garden of Eden. And they walked, and before sunset, they saw the firing cherubim with the fiery swords in front of the gates of the Garden of Eden. They could hardly believe that they had found the garden. But they knew there was no entry, not with those swords, not with those cherubim. But suddenly, there was a familiar voice. Adam, Eve. It's the first time I ever tried to be God's voice. Adam, Eve, you have paid your dues. You may return to the garden. Return. Be back in my presence day in and day out. They looked at each other, surprised and a little scared. God's voice that had tough memories. Adam said, God, it's been so long since we were in the Garden of Eden. Can you remind me what it's like? The garden is beautiful, climate controlled, beautiful trees like in a greenhouse. Everything is in bloom, and you're not allergic to any of it. You can eat from everything except that one tree. Still, there has to be one tree you can't eat from. But otherwise, you can eat. You don't have to work another day. You don't have to worry. Everything you could want will be provided. But you must stay within the garden. It's our safe cocoon. You can't leave. And Eve looked at Adam. She took his calloused hand in hers. And she recalled the pain with which she had given birth. As she held his hand, she recalled the long hours he had plowed, the way he had hurt his back in the course of many years of hard labor in order to gather not only food but to create a shelter that had become their home. She recalled that indeed they had had their ups and downs, but somehow as they had gotten older, they had even gotten closer. And as Adam looked at Eve, he knew what she was thinking. Eve, he said, let's go home. Between Rosh Hashana and Yom Kippur is a time for introspection. I have 3 things I would like you to consider. The first is to make a list to be put on your bathroom mirror of 5 things that you're grateful for. Blessings of the water in which you swim, the things that naturally are taken for granted. Make a list of 5 with a stickum and put them up. And next to it, put up another stickum. 3 things that you aspire to. I will add that the rabbis acknowledge that coveting is the 10th commandment. It's the only emotion that the 10 Commandments deals with. Maimonides says that, and he's a practical lawyer, that means you shouldn't act on your feelings. A Hasidic master, Michael of Volozhin, says that it's the reward for observing the other 9 commandments. That if you observe the other 9, you won't keep score by what others have. You'll look inward, and that will be your tally. But the rabbis acknowledge that it's okay to strive. It's clearly good to strive by looking at others for how one could be more kind, for how one could be more learned. Those are coveting that we would call holy coveting. So I invite you on a second stickum to write down 3 things that you strive for. Can't include material, but you might consider what else really matters. and look at them side by side, for ultimately, spirituality is a sacred dance. It's dancing with both, with yearning and contentment, with wanting more and needing no more. That's the reality on this side of the Garden of Eden. But I have one more thing that's more long-term. People think of spirituality. People say, oh, I want to be more spiritual. And when they say it, they usually mean that they want to be close to God in nature more often, that they want to learn to pray and pray more often too, that they want to learn to meditate. All those are tools for acknowledging the goodness of our world and for being present. But spirituality is far more than that. Spirituality is being present for those who are in our immediate lives. If you're married, treating your spouse more lovingly is your spiritual homework. If you're blessed to have children, how you treat your children is a spiritual practice. If you're blessed that your parents are still alive, how often you call and what you say is spiritual work. Another study. They wanted to see if couples would, in a college setting, who were young married, stay together or not. They would watch them through one-way mirrors. They found to a 90% degree reliability of predicting who would stay. Only one variable was examined. If there were 4 positive comments for every negative comment, that meant that that couple was secure. How often we fail to be aware in how we speak with loved ones, whether we're positive or not. They don't all have to be positive comments. You get that one negative that's included in the package. But it's about how it's packaged and how much positive there is too. And so in this, the year Tavshin Samach Zion, a new year, a Rosh Hashana of 5767, we're called by the shofar to go inward, to ask ourselves what would make us happy. For we're also taught that when we're happy, we experience God's presence, and it becomes our responsibility to be happy in this world, we who have the gifts of God's feast. Ribono Shalom, Master of the universe, may we make stickums on our bathroom mirrors. Between now and Yom Kippur, on one let us write what we are grateful for, and may we smile. And may we write a second of what we are aspiring toward, and may we smile too. May we learn to hear the music that's part of your creation, and may we dance to it with 2 feet. Amen.